everybody. This is Mike, and today we have a guest with us. His name is David Dahl. David, thank you for coming, sir.
It's glad to be here. I'm glad to be here. Thank
Good.
you for the invite.
Maybe a little bit of background, and then I'll let you kind of talk about yourself because you do it better than myself. But David Dahl started his career in 2008 as a farm advisor from the UC Extension in Merced up until 2018, really specializing in almonds, some walnuts, and pistachios, if I'm not wrong.
That's correct.
Yeah, and you've also published or co-authored about 35 peer-reviewed scientific journals. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And you got your bachelor's degree from Purdue.
That's correct.
And your master's from UC Davis.
And in plant pathology at
Plant
UC
pathology.
Davis.
Okay. So can you maybe just contextualize, like, okay, you grew up in Indiana, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you came out this way for your
Graduate work.
okay. And then can you maybe just give us a background of kind of that to today?
Yeah, sure. So in 2004, moved to UC Davis for my graduate program. I worked with prunus-free plant disease with Greg Brown, so working with almonds. That was my first introduction to almonds, was in graduate school. With Greg, Greg is known to do a lot of work in Phytophthora. So between Phytophthora, prunus-free plant disease, fumigant usage within replanting of almonds, I worked with almonds up and down the state from Chico to Kern County. And then finishing that program in 2008, I was offered a position to work as a farm advisor at UC Cooperative Extension in Merced County. Worked there for 10 years, covering a wide variety of projects from nutrients to disease to replant work, fumigant work on almond, as well as pruning and rootstock trails with walnut, as well and pistachio. Mm-hmm. And then in 2018, I made the move to Évora, Portugal, which is about an hour outside of Lisbon, to manage a farm operation and investment there. Yeah. And I've been there for the past 8 years.
And those are almonds?
That's all. That's predominantly almonds. That's correct.
Okay. And you also go by the name The Almond Doctor. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, that's a website. So I think people have kind of projected that name onto me. So
absolutely.
Yeah, colloquially, that is probably what people would say is I go by. But yeah, it's a website I started back in 2009.
Yeah.
And the idea was to extend research-based information to farmers, because I feel like all farmers should have access to information, because that's the one thing they shouldn't have to struggle to find when they're trying to make decisions. And I continued it and still continue it to this day. And it's actually good. I really feel like writing is a form of communication that people have failed to understand how important it is. Like it really, not only does it help you communicate an idea, it also helps you understand and learn the idea. You can't write about something unless you truly understand how to explain it. Yeah. And I think that journey, like through through the development of that blog, has helped made me help improve my understanding of almonds. And then I think as I became a farm manager and understanding the practical application of trying to put a lot of these practices into place, that has also given me maybe a different perspective than when I was just in university work or in academia.
Right. So I really found you because of the Almond Doctor website, and you have a Patreon account as well. Yep. And you put your articles out there. And I like your articles because you cite research, right? So these are not maybe this kind of gut feel observation that you're making. They're all backed by your research papers. So you had written one, I believe, March 22nd of this year. And that's really what I'd like to talk about.
Yep.
And that was really your observations and maybe your ideas about what's to come.
With the high heat that we had back in March in California.
So could you kind of just run through that article a little bit and maybe your observations or what you've observed as you've been here for a little while?
Yeah, so the premise is looking at the conditions that follow bloom, that are the weather conditions that follow bloom. So generally what we like to see is temperatures that are in that 65 to maybe 80 degree range to maximize the cell division and cell expansion period that we have within almonds. So after flowering, the nuts go through a point where they're just dividing. one cell becomes two, and that continues on for roughly 6 weeks or so. Don't quote me on the exact week number, but it does vary by year. But it continues for a period of time in which during that time, the plant develops the cells that will then expand to form the kernel, the hull, and the shell. Mm-hmm. Those weather conditions that are experienced during that period post-flowering are really critical to how the plant uses its energy through that cell division period. So if you have higher temperatures, the plant requires more energy for for respiration. So it needs to burn more of that stored carbohydrate. It burns it to just do basic metabolic function.
Which would be what? Just growing limbs or growing leaves?
I mean,
staying alive?
So just like us, we have a metabolic rate. We respire, we breathe in oxygen, we take in sugar, we use that oxygen and sugar to make energy that we use to move our arms, lift weights, whatever we may do, go for a run, all the things that we're told we need to do. And plus just manage our heart rate, blood circulation, brain function, etc. The plant has a lot of similar aspects. So the plant has it has a metabolic rate as well. It needs to move proteins up and down. It needs to build plant tissue, and in the spring you're growing, so it has catabolic or anabolic processes that are putting leaves and fruit development, etc., and those types of aspects. And at that time of the year, the plant doesn't have a lot of leaves, so it's relying on all the stored carbohydrate from the previous year. So around July, which is just before harvest starts, the tree begins to accumulate and develop the carbohydrate. So the photosynthate that's being developed at that time is no longer going to the fruit because it's getting ready for harvest. And from there, it goes back into the wood, into what we call non-structural carbohydrates, so the reserves of the tree that then become available the next spring. And that is used by the tree to leaf out, set the flower, leaf out, set the fruit, and then hold as much fruit as it can until the leaves fully expand, capture light, and then be able to essentially offset that energy requirement by the tree.
Okay.
So this point that you have post-spring or post-flowering is really critical because you're looking at all the reserves from the spring, or the previous fall, from the previous fall. You got through the winter, and this is, again, where chill is an interesting aspect of this too, is the cooler the winter, the less energy is used, because plants use less energy when the temperature is lower.
Yep.
Because the rate of respiration is lower. And as temperature increases, the rate of respiration goes up. So when you get into flowering and you have more energy that is required just to do basic function, and you only have so much in the bank account, you have less money that can go feed all the other children around the table, which includes the nuts that are growing on the tree.
Right.
So that is that aspect of having less energy to go into the almonds during cell division leads to less cells being divided, which after they go through cell expansion in March, April, May, you have essentially less cells to fill, and you have a smaller nut, smaller fruit overall.
Right. So maybe just going back to a little bit of like what the valley experienced, right? Maybe by region. So I talked to a meteorologist for a while before you came, and I tried to understand what he said, which was relatively difficult at times. But basically, Kern County was hitting peaks of about 95 degrees. Okay. Fresno County was hitting anywhere from 93 to 95 degrees in March. Madera was 87 to 91 at the highs, and basically Stanislaus, San Joaquin were about 86 to 90 degrees. Then he threw a statistic to me with the average high temperature for the valley was about 80 degrees. The average normal temperature typically for the month of March is 67. So his comment was that we were outside of the normal standard deviation by quite a ways in terms of just the average temperatures that we had seen and experienced in the month of March. So as the plant is dividing cells, your article would say that these temperatures stopped cell division.
That's correct. So there's two aspects. Yes, the short answer is yes. When you're that high, what happens is as temperature increases, it's not a linear relationship with respiration. The rate of respiration is not a linear response to temperature. It's an exponential response. So as you see temperature go up 5 degrees, you don't see a 5% increase, you see a 20% increase in the amount of energy it takes to maintain metabolic function.
Okay.
On top of that, as the plant gets hotter, you start seeing the degradation of enzymes and other aspects that make the plant have to work harder just to do basic functions. So you actually can have a point where the tree is too hot. And at that period of time, there's not a lot of leaf tissue,
Right.
which is pulling water, and you're not seeing a lot of evaporative cooling on that plant as well. So when the leaves are pulling water, it's not just trading that water for carbon, which is what we think is photosynthesis. It's using that water as an evaporative cooling effect to keep the canopy at a lower temperature than the outside air. So when you're in spring and you have small leaves and you have a lot of sun, a lot of heat, the wood is a lot warmer than the ambient temperature on top of that. So that is another aspect that often is overlooked when we're looking at when dormant or also very shortly after leaf out. And the plant tries to respond to this by accelerating its various processes, including leaf out. So we often refer to this in growing degree days. But when you have a hot spring, you'll see the trees will leaf out faster.
Right.
And in many ways, it's the plant responding to the environment to try to get out its evaporative cooling pads in order to
cool itself down.
Cool itself down.
Okay.
And I mean, that's a little bit of anthropomorphication, but it is in essence, I think, how these plants evolved is try to manage the heat. They can't get up and move.
Right.
They can't go turn on the air conditioner. So they're finding the way over time they've evolved these processes to facilitate this facilitate this cooling effect. But nonetheless, when you're there at spring and you go back and you're at 90 degrees when it should be 65, you're going to be using probably 60, 70, maybe 100% more energy than what it would be if it was in that 65 to 70 degree range.
Yeah.
And often we like to see temperatures here in that 65 to 75 degree range as kind of optimum to allow accumulation of growing degree days, allow the plant to progress through its normal stages at a normal rate. But when it's hot like this, the plant's responding and it's trying to do everything at once. And the first thing it wants to do is take care of itself and make sure it has some almonds to survive, because it's not there to produce almonds for us. It's there to produce almonds for its next generation.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if the almonds are a little smaller or a little bigger. It just wants to make sure it's able to get those fertilized almonds into completion, into development.
So then as it gets hot, cell division stops, the tree starts to prioritize other functions, right? Pushing out its leaves. Can you restart cell division if it starts to cool off?
Well, so it's not like it stops, it just slows.
Okay.
But I think what you're saying is if it cools off, can you somehow reverse the effects of that cell division period being terminated or ending or going through that phase? The short answer is no. It's just like how you can't become a younger person.
Yeah.
So once you become a year older, you can't become a year younger. Mm-hmm. And that is what we tend to see. We get through this process in time. The plant begins cell expansion, and at that point, it's already moving on through other development stages because it's required to kind of finalize its process. So when you have the cell division period being shortened or slowed or terminated, what you end up with is just less cells that are divided.
So less volume in your kernel.
Yeah. Now, the plant has other spots that are going through cell division. We're just talking about the fruit development at this period.
Right.
So you have to be careful that you have to separate all these different aspects. You have the roots that are growing, you have the shoots that are growing. Yeah. All this is going on. Yeah. But we're specifically talking about fruit development when we make this discussion.
And so you've been in the valley for about a week, about to head back to Portugal. You've kind of been up and down the valley. Have you observed you're seeing smaller kernels? Maybe it's regional. What have you seen?
Yeah, well, to go back to the article real quick. So one thing we mentioned was that we were projecting this based on the physiology response of the plant to heat. Mm-hmm. There was an expectation that we were going to see smaller fruit size, in particular smaller kernel size. I also felt that was going to lead to an earlier harvest because you're accelerating the fruit development process, right. So that should lead to an earlier harvest as well. And that is what we're seeing. Now, what was interesting to me was the readouts of the temperature from across the ranges. So when I was outside of Fresno, I felt that we were seeing a lot smaller kernels, especially on Independence, some of the blocks I was visiting. but as well as across other varieties like Nonpareil that were coming into harvest. Now, I should add that we're in July, and I also saw Nonpareil blocks being shook. And I don't remember, it's not very frequently that we see Nonpareil blocks in the Fresno region being shook the last week of July. Usually, if they are, they're green. No, these were brown, butterfly, dried. So, they're ready to go when they're on the ground. So we are significantly advanced compared to previous years. And then as I moved my way up the state, I felt like you were still seeing smaller kernel size, but when I got far enough north, so north of Modesto, I start feeling, well, things are more what I would expect in general kernel size range, as well as the timing of harvest. Right. I was in a block yesterday that was it was in the Delta region, and it's cooler there, and it's Shasta, and they're still green, and they haven't split. In contrast, when I was in the Shasta block on Tuesday, it was split, nearly ready to be shook. Right. And the difference was maybe 60 miles in geographic location.
Probably further south.
Quite further south. So that was just between Madera and Merced on that block. So you do see these effects of heat that can be relatively localized. And people tend to think, it has to be like major differences. No, it could be a 5-degree difference. It can make all the effect that we're tending to see now.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to comment through your article?
I'm trying to think.
Or any other observations that you've seen?
So I think when we relate what we saw in 2026 to a few years ago, there's actually a little bit of a difference that we observed. So in 2024, I believe it was a cooler spring, and we had lower fruit set on a lot of blocks. So in those cases, we saw at the end of the year, we saw kind of a delayed, protracted, like harvest was delayed. It took a little bit longer to get started. And we found almonds, a relatively low turnout issue on almonds. We found large kernels, but still in that 22 to 26% turnout range instead of the 25 to 28. And that is due to a very similar effect. When you have a cooler spring, it slows it actually extends that period of cell division because it slows the respiration rate of the plant and has more energy to put into cell division. Okay. And so you end up with bigger fruit, bigger kernels that are associated with that, as well as a delayed harvest timing.
Right.
And so when you get these springtime conditions that tend to follow flowering that are abnormally cool or abnormally hot, it's going to impact not just the fruit size at that period of time, but 6 months later when you're deciding to shake those trees.
Yeah. So would you think that maybe some of that springtime temperature would equate to those thicker hulls, even though you maybe had good kernel sizes? Maybe when maybe we should define fruit. Right? When you say the fruit on the tree, are you including the hull, shell, and the kernel?
Yeah,
as
that's
the fruit?
correct. Yeah,
okay.
yeah, just as a fruit, just as you would a peach.
Right. Right.
And a lot of this work hasn't really specifically been done in almond. It's really been done in peach. So in peach, they use a lot of timing to pit hardening where they're cutting into peaches, checking when it is. And that's a good indication of when they need to thin and when they'd be expecting harvest on that particular variety. And since almonds and peaches are actually very closely related, you see a lot of similarities in the fruit development process.
Okay.
It's just that we care about a different aspect of the fruit.
Right.
And so going back to that year when we had those cooler temperatures in the bigger hull, I'm not convinced that the weather was associated with a thicker hull that year. I look back at like 10 years of previous data, and I didn't feel that there was a significant period that would say like, this is why it was hot enough, it stopped cell division for the kernel, but allowed cell division for the hull to continue. Yeah. I didn't see that, but what I did feel is that we had lower fruit count. And my experience in Portugal is when we have lower fruit count, we have lower turnouts. And why that is because you have less mouths to feed, so the tree puts more energy into it, and the hull's bigger, the shell's bigger, and the kernel's bigger. And when the hull is 50% of the total fruit weight, if it's 10% bigger, it's going to be 52% of total fruit weight or 51% instead of 52% instead of 50%.
Right.
Like it probably was just more of an imbalance based upon how much everything weighed at that given year.
Right.
And I think everyone's really concerned, thinking, oh, I must have did something wrong. I was farming the incorrectly through the year. If that was the case, your kernel size would be lower too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you came into a situation where you had low turnout and your kernel size was below average, then you can start thinking, well, what did I do wrong? But if you're having low turnout and you're still or have above average kernel sizing,
right.
you kept those kernels plump, right. You irrigated them properly. Most likely it was a weather factor that impacted fruit set. Could be low chill, rain during bloom, bad bees, poor practices the year before.
Yeah.
That can impact how much fruit's on that tree. And then that would lead to a lower turnout, even though you did everything correct.
Right.
And so I was actually asked to evaluate a couple portfolios because they're concerned about that. And first thing I looked at was what was their average kernel size. And if it was high, I would say, well, let's start looking at other practices. And if it was meaning a lot of kernels per ounce,
mm-hmm.
I'd start looking at other practices. If it was large nuts, I would say, well, okay, we can start focusing on other aspects of that year to make that determination of what caused this.
Right. Maybe it's not human error.
Yeah, I mean, look, farming's hard. Like, you're always managing weather as you kind of go through it. And I think everyone listening to this podcast knows that. I mean, if anyone thinks it's easy, go buy a farm. You'll probably learn firsthand what we're getting at. Every year is different, and you're trying to mitigate and manage these practices in real time, and you never know what tomorrow brings. So, I think that aspect of trying to determine what should be done or could be done, you're always second guessing it because you get to the end of the year, things aren't where you want it, but at that time, you didn't necessarily know what tomorrow is going to bring. So you're trying to manage everything in real time.
Right.
And I think when I look back to that period where we probably saw the biggest impact on yield in the past few years is I think a lot of people had to cut cost.
Yeah.
And I don't think they did a very good job of managing nutrients and probably disease management and irrigation management because there wasn't money to do it.
Absolutely.
So they did it out of necessity. So there's no fault there. It's just that it led to a lower fruit count and they're probably lower turnout. And I think everyone threw their arms in the air like they did something wrong. But I'm not fully convinced that was the pure only reason why. Anything done wrong was the year before.
Right.
Now, jumping back to this year, some things I wish we would have probably done, maybe as an industry, is like this would have been a year to really evaluate a lot of these plant growth regulators that we often, some people write off as snake oil, some people spray them no matter what, some people swear by them. Like you see the whole gamut, and it's because there's a lot of different products on the market that provide a little bit of confusion. But most of these products, especially when we start talking about seaweed type products or kelp extracts or plant-based extracts, they help the plant mitigate and manage stress. So if we come into a stress period, I think this is the type of work that we need to look at as an industry is when we have these one-off events, are we able to mitigate some of these effects of the heat by essentially reducing the stress of the plant through the application of these products? I think it's possible. I just don't feel we're responsive enough, as farmers to probably make that decision because we're in a routine and the heat comes up and you're working through other things. And I also felt putting my researcher hat back on from 10 years ago, it's very difficult to go drop everything, go find a farmer to work with and get this stuff onto trees. Right. So I think there needs to be a little bit of an understanding of how we can take advantage of these anomalies that are, quote, out of the standard deviation of normal weather to identify ways to mitigate it. So when it happens again in the future, we have some information on it.
Right.
That would be on my wish list. I think we take for granted, being in Portugal is one thing I've learned is we tend to take for granted the consistency of the weather in the valley. And I would encourage everyone to understand how fortunate they are to have the consistency in which this is an anomaly and do everything they can to maintain their ability to produce almonds and other agricultural crops here because there's no other place in the world like it.
Right. Absolutely. I have a couple other questions. talking to one of our friends, Shannon East. He wanted to know your opinion on red leaf blotch. Have you done much work with it? Should we be worried about it?
Well, I mean, red leaf blotch. So red leaf blotch is a fungal disease that causes defoliation of the tree. Usually it's a summer defoliation. And if it happens early enough, the tree reliefs and you don't have those vegetative buds becoming fruit buds. So it impacts your future yield. And it is a leaf disease. So contrasting to, let's say, anthracnose or brown rot, which is a fruit and flower disease, or a fruit disease, or flower disease, it's a little bit like rust or scab in those ways. So what we tend to see with red leaf blotch is that it has one life cycle in a given year. It infects the leaves. When those leaves drop to the ground, those spores survive, and then they come out the following spring when conditions and when temperatures and weather conditions are conducive. And that often is warming, usually I think above 50 degrees, might be 55, and rain. So when we start getting a little warmer temperature and some moisture to help those spores kind of hydrate and then move into the air to infect the leaves. So that process, that cycle of that pathogen is what we need to keep in mind when we're trying to manage it and control it. So work done by Florent Troyas, which is the specialist, the pathology specialist in Kearney, as well as researchers across Iberia and Portugal, where this disease has been across the Mediterranean for years, probably centuries, is that timing applications of fungicides early in the season help prevent infections early in the season. So if you're able to keep the leaves on the tree to get you through harvest. And generally, the solution that we have employed in Portugal to manage red leaf blotch is to spray. And we have a lot more spring rain, so we tend to spray every 2 to 3 weeks. And that's not necessarily practical in the California system, because I understand the cost of doing it all. But starting a spray program to make sure you're covering the leaves at the beginning of leaf out, and probably every 3-ish weeks after that through probably the end of April, should provide you adequate control that any infections that do occur would be mild enough that you won't see defoliation by year end. Now, there has been some work with other types of products to do this. And I think there's a lot of good research that will be coming out to maybe help reduce the need to go out and make spray applications. But at the moment, the research is indicating starting at petal fall and probably making the application, if you don't have rain, maybe pushing it a few days to try to stretch that window of protection. But if you do, make sure you have those leaves covered, like going through petal fall and all the way through April. Ideally, it's best to spray before the rain to provide protection, because that's what's triggering a sporulation event. But I will add to that you will see sporulation when you're getting increases in humidity from like irrigating or micro sprinkler work. So you will get a spore release if it's been a pretty dry spring, and then all of a sudden you start turning on your micros. You might have some problems there, but that work's yet to be determined.
Okay. And what about the heat that, the valley itself broadly experienced, and the reduction in potential pistachio production? Do you think that what we're seeing on kernel size potentially is basically also what has affected the pistachio production?
Well, that's a little different. Okay. So we're looking at the cell division process associated fruit development in almond. In pistachio, it was an impact actually at flowering. So when that high heat came, everything was flowering. So you had both the male, you're trying to get, with pistachios, you have to remember you have males, the male parts and the female parts are on different plants.
Right.
So you need to get the pollen from the male to the female plant. And when you have high heat, there's two things that happen. It affects pollen viability, and it also affects receptivity of the female flower. So during that high heat period, what is believed to actually happen is that the stigma weren't able to receive the pollen, and you had a lot of sterile pollen from the high heat as well. So this led to a lot of flowers that failed to be fertilized, failed to be pollinated and fertilized, and then led to a lot of clusters not forming, or if they did form, a higher frequency of blanking. And generally this type of heat event is not very common in pistachios, but things have occurred that have impacted flowering in the past. So when you look back at the production history in pistachio, you always will tend to see like 1 year it's just terrible across the industry, and then that will often trigger an alternate bearing. So you're probably going to see lower yields for sure this year in California. As far as how much, I'm not the most knowledgeable of the industry to probably comment on that. But I suspect that next year we're going to have a record crop.
Yeah, I think most people agree with you on that. Yeah.
I think we're going to probably like 400 to 500 pounds to probably like 6,000, 7,000 pounds.
Yeah, I think most people would agree with you.
It's going to shoot up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And that's really normal. And then I think what history has shown, at least when I was working with these different varieties, is that are in pistachios, is that will tend to moderate out as the conditions kind of go through time. So you're not going to see that huge up, down, up, down. It will go up, but it won't go as far down, and then won't go as far up, and it'll probably get back to average if we're able to maintain good conditions for 5 years or so. Now, the other thing I heard, just to add to that, is a lot of people say, well, we don't suspect Lost Hills and Golden Hills will alternate bear. When you have a situation like this, they're going to alternate bear, and we don't have a lot of experience with Lost Hills and Golden Hills going through a statewide heat event or statewide rain event through flowering to really know how much that alternate bearing cycle will persist. But I think we'll know after this. Yeah. But I just, it's just part of the plant's nature to alternate bear when it goes through a crop setback like this.
Yeah. So maybe to wrap up the almond piece of this, we should expect in probably more the southern regions of the state, maybe a little bit more of a dramatic sizing, maybe variance and or on the smaller end of things.
I think that's correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think an earlier harvest, and I think we'll start seeing it as it comes in. I mean, it's too early to know. Like, look, everyone wishes they had a crystal ball, but I would, and you have to look at the thing as a population. So when you look at it from 17 per ounce to 32 per ounce, and we always average 25s-ish, 25, 26, 26, 27s. I would just imagine that whole thing shifting a little smaller. So it doesn't mean you're not going to have big kernels. You're just not going to have as many.
Yeah.
And it means you're probably going to have more small kernels on top of it.
Right.
So that bell curve is just shifting to the smaller side.
Absolutely.
And I think as that temperature gradient dropped, so as we had cooler temperatures going up the valley, I would suspect that would shift slowly back to the average size for those regions.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add to that? We good?
I think I'm good on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And if people want to get in contact with you, you have the almonddoctor.com.
Yeah, and my email is available. It's daviddahl01@gmail.com.
Okay. You also have the Patreon account. I think that's patreon.com/the Almond Doctor.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I find a lot of value out of the papers you write.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people get intimidated by the paywall, but even signing up for the free account, you get postings, and I usually, there's also things I post up for free on there too.
Yeah.
And I need to get a little bit better about getting more information up there on.
So far, I've enjoyed it. So I think I'm paying $15 a month. Well worth it.
And I usually get 1 to 2 articles up a month.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it. So thank you very much, David Dahl, for coming on out here, and safe travels back home.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thanks again.